Dungeons and Dragons Adventurer, Trial Issue 3. So this video is now going to look at the third trial issue for Dungeons and Dragons Adventurer before it got the actual release. But first up, I just want to thank the video sponsor. That's just a joke. So I just want to thank RyeAlboa, who very generously sent me his copy of the trial issue 3, which has enabled me to do the video because I didn't have a copy or even much information about it until now. So just thanks very much for your generosity, which has allowed me to look a bit more into some of the changes they made, which is interesting. Now, before I start, all the little colour there, that's just my little ring binders. I found a set of coloured ones online and it had basically all the colours for the 4 sections. So I was like, oh, that'll be perfect for protecting the magazines. And then the 5th colour is just for the title, just so it keeps it in there in the folder at the front without ripping it apart. Enough about that, on to talk about the magazines. So the first obvious one is the cover art's changed, as usual. So the old issues all had the same art and the new issues have all got the same art, which obviously means it's the same adventure. We'll see that the grappling rules have been removed now for conditions, and we're no longer looking at the Forgotten Realms because obviously that lore got moved to the previous issue. So now we just become a great wizard. And then we know the price changed by £1, but interesting enough, the barcodes actually changed as well. They still both say number 3, but the end couple of digits have changed. If that means anything, I don't know. That's just something I've just spotted having a quick look. Starting with the contents, the intro lines have been slightly changed. Obviously, we've gone from mostly looking at the elves to now looking at elves and halflings in the issue. So we're no longer looking at otherworldly grace and natural affinity for magic. Instead, we're highlighting the culture of the 2 pre-generated characters. And obviously the line, a handy guide to grappling helps bring an extra element, to a handy guide to conditions help brings an extra element. Obviously, that's just a direct swap from combat to conditions. One thing to note here is obviously the actual combat section's gone. We've got Sage Advice because combat's generally been moved to Sage Advice anyway. And then the rest of the stuff's been renumbered. But interestingly, this was Combat 4. And looking back at the other 2 issues, there hasn't been a combat section yet. So I don't know why it wasn't called Combat 1. It just seems a bit odd. And then just while we're looking back at the other issues, something I missed out I mentioned before. In the Trial 2 for the Sage Advice, it mislabeled them as number 1 and number 2 in the contents. But they were labelled correctly as 3 and 4 in the actual pages. Just one small bit I missed and just found out just now. However, the next issue box here with your cleric lore and vampires and everything, that seems to match up with what we'd be expecting to find in issue 4 based on the current issue. Although that doesn't have a next box yet. But so as there's no Sage Advice, we're just going to jump into character creation. And following on from how they've changed all the actual categories and the sections, they've also, you can see where they've changed all the numbering, it's made it much better. So the fact that it's now A over 6, because before it just went, oh, character, race lore, wizard lore. So if I had to try and find the wizard lore 3 in the magazine, I'd be a bit lost, whereas now they've actually numbered it and lettered it and everything. It works a lot better. Anyway, back to skills. So to begin with, you can see it's pretty much identical. All the art matches up. All the text is matching up too as well. The ability scores here now listed over the page, but they've rearranged it. So you can see they're listed in the actual order you tend to find them in your character sheets, rather than this weird order that starts with charisma first for some reason. Just looks a bit odd. But anyway, over the page you can see mostly it's still the same, the artwork's still the same, all the text is mostly the same, it's still got the same top tips. Although now it explains about the E's on the character sheets represent Crantor's expertise, which it didn't really mention it specifically on the character sheet before. Further down on here as well, it explains about doing actual checks, so your dice roll plus your modifier and proficiency. It's not mentioned in that text, but they've got the whole box about it for making the roll. But this kind of got removed because back in issue 1 we had about making rolls, so the section here kind of expanded it in the trials, but when they transferred it over they actually expanded it a bit more anyway naturally, so the box was just a bit unneeded. Although one thing that did have was noting that 1s and 20s are critical misses and critical hits. They're not mentioned here. Critical hits were briefly discussed in the first main issue about it's the double dice, but critical misses haven't even been discussed up until issue 12. Although I think I might have just found them in issue 12. But in theory, they should have a proper critical section at some point coming up, I reckon. Onto the skills explanation now. And the front page was actually completely identical, so it's gone straight to the back page, where it's mostly almost completely identical apart from the persuasion details. They've removed the note about acting in bad faith is a deception check, not persuasion. And they've clarified it's a charisma persuasion check, not just a persuasion is used when acting. Otherwise, apart from the persuasion, it was all the same. So we move on to elves now. And you can see again, it's still, most of the issues pretty consistent with the original. To start with, it slowly gets more and more different as we go on. All the art's the same, but you can see the timeless perspective box was removed to make room for the mythical lineages discussion. Some of that box has been shortened and moved elsewhere, but most of it about elves being amused and excited and rarely fazed by trivial events, or flexible in the face of danger, opting for diplomacy, that's all been just gone now out of the text. Because over the page we see the original stuff that was moved in to make the mythical lineages box, and they haven't added the rest of the text back in, they've just made the picture bigger to cover the space. The only difference on the rest of the page being in the elves of Faerun box. Our moon elves are no longer called the silver elves. They no longer traditionally get on with their non-elf neighbours. And it's just given up trying to call them dark elves and just gone straight to the drow now. After elves we move on to wizards. And now this is pretty much word for word and art for art exactly the same. Except for the one obvious difference, and I don't know why it happens, but rather than change the art, they've literally just got the same piece of art and just mirrored it. It's a bit strange why they've done it, unless someone in the design place said, oh, that looks a bit odd, flipped it around, went, that looks better, maybe. It might follow in the theme that all the characters are all looking to the right, maybe. I'd have to look back through all the issues to check if that's correct. We check on the back as well. This page, though, is just completely identical, so I don't need to go through that. Even down to the points of talking about Gandalf and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Well, I guess they're not completely identical, because the old issues had numbers for everything, whereas the new issues only ever had the page numbers for the adventures. So it's not completely identical, but otherwise it is identical. And again, we get to another abilities page that has been renamed to a features page for the wizard, and it's also put first level. Obviously the point is you'll have multiple pages, each for a different level, so that would make it easier to find. And you'll see down here they've changed it to the spell attack modifier has now become the spell attack bonus, with also the additional references and how to find it all for the D&D Beyond, of course. And otherwise just a general bit of rephrasing around that whole part, but the same message is conveyed across with the same example. And we keep going with the wizard spellbook with more references to D&D Beyond. I do like that because they've changed all the page titles and stuff. You now don't have this spell casting in capitals or looks a bit out of place, and it's my natural stated advice, see spell casting. Prefer the look of that. And in the issue it does now mention if you want to change your free spells, you can do it after taking a long rest for the night, which wasn't mentioned before. I'd have to find the exact text in the spellcasting section, but might have just said you prepare your spells every day. It's got a line to explain it now. So then we move on to the combat section in the old issue, which obviously was removed to Sage Advice for the current run. And then as pointed out originally, it was Combat 4, even though it hadn't been in combat. Doesn't make sense as well, because this is Combat 6, so I don't know where Combat 1 to 3 is, unless it was something they added then removed, or unless they counted the little booklet. But for starters with, you can see that they've changed the font of the title, and they've gone from improve your chances of winning to improve your chances of victory. Otherwise though, all the rest of it is exactly the same. And we've now got a top tip, so you know, for information on grapple works, see Sage Advice 6B Conditions Part 2. Which might be why they've moved it 9 issues later, just because it gives a chance to talk about conditions. Because not only do you need the grappling conditions, you also need to know about the prone condition as well. So all that's already covered, of course, by this point. And I guess shoving and grappling everything's kind of more advanced combat. And to start with, I don't think by the third encounter they want you trying to grab everything. They'd rather you just keep slashing away and worry about this sort of stuff later. By the time it's introduced as well, your second level, so stuff like your fighter can bonus action or bonus feature shove a creature before attacking it on prone for the advantage. Now then we move on to the lore, starting with the Forgotten Realms, which as I already mentioned had moved back one issue because they added that random fighter lore thing in issue 1 which pushed all the rest of the lore back, even though fighter lore never actually became lore. But you'll see to start with it's completely identical again until we turn over to the next part of the page, where to start with they've changed 66% of the artwork. That's the obvious change. The other thing they've got is they've now added a little section here talking about the Underdark, which wasn't mentioned before. Mostly though, this is all the same. But then we get an extra lore bit in the trial issue, the Red Wizards. And here they are. Now this doubling up of lore in this trial meant we've actually, in the main issue, we're at an identical place now. And you'll see this is pretty much identical again. I guess there's not much to change in the lore section really. Apart from the picture's a bit odd. We had a darker picture before and there was a bit more of a base there, which is now gone. But yeah, basically identical. There are a couple of small changes. It now tells you a lich is an undead wizard, whereas before it just called him a lich for one small minor thing. And turning over in the Lichdom box, if you read this first, it will tell you can find description of the Zolkirs on the right, which you didn't have before. Just a little go and look to the right in case you read that and go, what's that? And scroll back the page or whatever. Although for the Lichdom box, it has now actually got a lich as the picture rather than a pre-lich picture as a picture. The only other bit in here is for some reason they've changed the red text to gold text. There doesn't seem to be much of a reason until we consider the next page as we move on to the adventure. And that's because you're going to see throughout the adventure, all of the red text has been changed to gold text, because now it fits in with the fact that all the encounters and adventures is in the gold section of all the filing, as you can see from my little dots there. Whereas previously, obviously, that was red. And then I guess just because the page is a double page spread, they've probably just caught that in with the rest of the red text and they've changed it all. Moving on from those graphical changes though, as we get to stuff in the text, and obviously there's going to be small little changes here and there, but the encounter adventure section is the biggest change in the issue. Obviously they've added D&D Beyond as before, and down the bottom here you'll see the Red Wizard's Ghost has now become the Red Wizard's Spirit, but that one's actually a bit more than just a bit of a text change, as you'll find out as we get later in the encounter and towards the stats at the back. So as we begin with the adventure, you'll see they've taken this text about what happened to the scout and they've actually moved it to pre-beginning the encounter, which I think works better so you know what's happening to the scout before you start doing this, because otherwise you're meant to go through the adventure, do all the players, get to observatory, and then pause where you go, oh hang on, I've just got a bit of text to read about what's actually going on. Not sure as well why, but here they go, oh, you get 50 GP and in brackets gold pieces. It just called it gold pieces before. I don't know why they've added the fact of the abbreviation description, unless it's the first time they've abbreviated gold pieces in the magazine this time round. I don't think it was though, it's just a bit odd. I did now add a top tip though, don't forget to roleplay the NPCs and describe the locations to help bring the encounter to life for the players. An excellent DM top tip. Our next page of encounter brings us to the actual map for the observatory, as well as starting to talk about the locations. One thing you'll see is I've now added some text to all the stairs to help you with navigating the observatory tower. Also, somehow when doing it, swapped around the number 3 and the number 4 locations. Originally, they were actually correct about the secret stairs in the kitchen before they changed it to the incorrect way around. Inside your living quarters too, where there's the secret door to the fireplace, your characters will now get a wisdom perception check to see if they can hear the muffled thumps coming from the secret door. Searching for it's still exactly the same as before, but now your characters are more likely to hear the thumps and go investigate the area to start with, rather than just going and going, oh, nice fireplace, and walking off. And when you do find the secret stairs, they now actually correctly link you to the observatory area 08, whereas previously it said the observatory area 03. So they've correctly changed that number, but doing so might have been why the map text got switched around wrong. Either way, you're still going to secret stairs and you're still going to find 8 diminutive mains. Now bolded the text so you know where they've got stats over the page, and they've also now listed them as demons rather than fiends. Both of those are correct though, I guess. Fiends are one of the 14 creature categories and demons are a subset of fiends or something, I guess. I don't know, I haven't found any difference in the wording so far. But either way, once you defeat them and find Shejada's corpse, you still get the Pearl of Power, but they have now added a little scrap of paper talking about a ritual to it. Yeah, the scrap of parchment detailing some sort of magical ritual. Maybe there was a bit of feedback that players weren't solving or getting the whole mystery aspect of it and realising what had gone on. So that might just be to give you a little clue. Perhaps playing both the adventures, one with and one without, you might see if there's any differences in how the party reacts to the big what's happened when we get to the top of the tower. So we move on up, ignoring the rest of it till we get to the cell. They do now tell you that the room is sealed with an arcade lock and only a successful DC 28 strength check can open it, which is beyond the party's abilities. I guess just in case any of your party try to do it there, and now your DM will just cut them off straight away rather than going, oh yeah, keep doing your rolls. And now also clarified that the message written in Elvish can actually be recognised and read by those who speak Elvish. So then we're going to move on to the observatory, which is the final room in the adventure. And we're going to find the scout possessed by the ghost/spirit, depending on which issue you look at. Before as a ghost, it said the only way to get rid of it was to force it out or kill the scout. Now they say, oh, you can actually knock the scout unconscious or kill her to get rid of the spirit. In essence, though, it's the same condition, which was revealed there. It's just simplified it a little bit. And now when the spirit gets revealed, it's actually got a line to scream about what's happened. Whereas when the ghost was revealed, it just moved on with doing ghost stuff. Then the ghost would have used the horrifying visage, which is a nasty thing that ages characters, whereas now it's moved to the slightly weaker Terrifying Scream for the Spirit. And then the difference, if that was resisted by the Spirit, it would just try to retreat down to the study, whereas if the Ghost's attack was resisted, or the Ghost action was resisted, it would try to retreat to the ethereal plane. We'll talk about those bits more later. However, if these attacks got resisted, your Spirit here is just going to try and retreat down to the study and just get away, whereas if the Ghost attack was resisted, it would try to go back to the ethereal plane and then come back and try and possess another character. Definitely worse. Both of them, though, are only going to use their Withering Touch attack if cornered. And again, you can see the trial issues seems to be a lot more deadly and more dangerous than the actual issues were. Like with previously, when they took out the Mimic for juvenile mimics, they've taken out a Ghost for a Spirit, which is kind of like just a weaker Ghost. But it makes sense because if these are new adventures for new players, you don't really want to be murdering them straight off. You want to give them a slightly easier chance and a better way of completing the encounters. And seeing as part of that, not only have they now got rid of the Ghost's like repossession tactic, which could probably wipe a party if you're not careful, you could actually make an intelligence check on religion to find out if you'd understand showing a Spirit or Ghost its bones could exercise it. Now for the Spirit, we only have to make a DC 10 intelligence check, whereas originally for the Ghost you actually had to make a DC 12. So it used to be a harder intelligence check to realise about finding the bones to get rid of the Ghost. The last thing on the page down here is the Pearl of Power. And obviously at this point you hadn't done anything to do with magic items and attunement. So now they actually explain to you better about what attunement requires, rather than just going, requires attunement by a spellcaster. It's now also technically been buffed in a way, because originally this Pearl of Power, you'd regain a spell slot. If it was 4th or higher, you'd regain a 3rd level spell slot. This just lets you, doesn't have any of that, so technically, if I regained a 5th level spell slot with this Pearl, it would still be a 5th level. But I definitely think that's for simplicity because they don't expect you to even get 4th level spells across the course of the 80 issues. Or even if you do, I don't think they're going to envision you're still going to have this Pearl of Power by that point. Moving to the last page, you'll see the ethereal plane box has now been removed. Obviously, because we haven't got a Ghost anymore, this bit wasn't really relevant anyway. And instead they replaced it with more text, but with all the details we've added, it makes sense that it's sort of moved over onto this final page. Then finally, we're going to get to the creature stat blocks. As per usual, the creature's challenge ratings and experience has been removed completely. Otherwise, there's no different for the scout and the main. But if we turn over to the final page, and you can already see how much difference we've got between the two. So you can see that going from the Ghost to the Spirit's taken a lot out of it. The Ghost's much more powerful. It's essentially 2 Ghost levels higher than the Spirit in effect, as a little way of looking at the 10d8 hit dice to the 8d8. That's how I see it anyway. So it's lost 2 Ghost levels and lost some powers. Going to your Spirit, our languages as well are now common. For the Ghost, it was any language you use in life, but I guess that's a general Ghost stat block, and this is a specific, not just Spirit, but it's Shaziyada's Spirit, so it's a mentioned named character. Which means she only spoke Common, which explains why during the course of the adventure all the notes were written in Common. Moving on to the actions, and the Withering Touch now does 2 damage dice less than the previous. As we've said, I said she was 2 levels lower as a joke, but there we go, 2 less dice again. And the Terrifying Scream, worse than their Horrifying Visage, because if someone fails badly, they no longer have to age themselves. The rest of the actions are gone, so our Spirit no longer has the etherealness the Ghost has, which is probably why the Spirit doesn't have the ethereal sight either, because all that's irrelevant, not needed, probably for simplicity. And the possession action's gone too. As I said, that feels like a nasty thing where every time you exercise the Spirit, it would just possess another member of the party, and possibly just make them keep fighting each other. It also had a thing about recharge. Now that's gone, we don't have any notes about recharge. And I mean, after seeing issue 12, I do have a fear about that, but it's something that's not discussed for another 9 issues after that, so we don't have to worry about that anyway. All gone. Right, so I guess that's everything that's been changed, except for one more thing. The free gifts. So originally Try Issue 3 came with a giant 20-sided dice, which obviously got moved to issue 4 instead for the actual run. Main reason being that issue 3 instead now came with acrylic minis. Now I'm keeping in one of the many tins I have available. Obviously I think the reason being the original premium for the trials was going to be you'd get some proper minis every so often when you get the coins for the new issue. And now because they're not doing premium minis anymore, they've just gone, oh, you can have some acrylic minis, so you'll get some at some point. Which means, like the law has been, all the gifts get pushed back. So this dice actually came out in issue 4, and then the dice that came out in issue 4 will come out in issue 5, and so forth. Don't worry, the giant dice will return. in what will eventually be the last in the trial issue comparison series, and hopefully when I get some more info on trial issue 4 to finish it. Well, I've got enough, but I just want to get some better stuff just to make it as good as I can do and a proper full comparison. Anyway, if you're still here, as normal, there'll be links popping up to follow about the magazine or follow about the series. Otherwise, thanks for watching and hope to catch you soon.